So the city of New York claims it's running out of money because of the asylum crisis, which has seen over 160,000 people come to New York City from the southern border seeking shelter. But critics are saying that's a lie. New York City's got the money. At least they had it, but then they wasted it.
As more buses arrived at Port Authority, the mayor says the city is severely impacted by the influx of migrants.
This issue will destroy New York City.
Less than half of the gap we're facing is as a result of asylum seekers. Even before asylum seekers started arriving, all those other costs were growing.
An apparently unwelcome surprise, 4 trees right in the middle of the sidewalk.
It's a little odd it's in the middle of the sidewalk.
We thought it was a joke. I don't know what the reasoning is, but it's kind of crazy.
The mayor's critics are lining up.
Where's the money? Where's the money that our children need, that our seniors need, that everybody in between needs?
So the city's comptroller, who oversees all spending in New York City, has come out and said that the asylum crisis is not the reason New York City has a massive budget deficit right now. And that might surprise a lot of people who view New York City as being the heart of this humanitarian crisis, especially when so many news articles come out about how it is going to bankrupt the city one way or the other. In fact, that's what the mayor himself has said. But is that true?
It is a short-term cost, and we need more help than we're getting, but it's not the primary driver of the budget gaps. Given the level.
Now, although this crisis is costing New York City billions of dollars each year, that statement makes it seem like we'd be in a better position if the city hadn't been wasting money on other things like this hole right here. I mean, don't get me wrong, these are some beautiful holes, but the reason that they're here is because something was in them that the city was so embarrassed by, they've immediately taken action to remove it.
Astoria residents literally yelling at just the sight of the city's new landscaping choice.
They should have put it here if they wanted to put trees, not here.
Oh man, you gotta be a special kind of smart to decide to put a tree right there. Literally, this is the middle of the sidewalk. And the city had put in about 5 or 6 of these. There are some serious problems with this. First of all, there's only enough room for one person to walk on each side of the tree, which kind of defeats the purpose of the sidewalk. It's for walking. That's its purpose. Also, having trees on the sidewalks is somewhat controversial anyways, and that's because if we look at a properly planted tree here, we can see that this area is kind of a mess. Roadside trees are also where dog waste can accumulate, in addition to trash and other debris. Not to mention, it's the city's job to take care of these, and somebody spray painted this one for some reason. Now look, I'm not hating on anybody who has a dog, but I mean, just look at this. This is gonna be happening in the middle of the sidewalk instead of on the perimeter of the sidewalk. You're gonna have to like avoid an obstacle course every morning as you walk to the train. And that's why today we're gonna be looking at a whole bunch of controversial ways New York City wastes money. From trees planted in the middle of sidewalks, to a medical center patients can't walk into, and a brand new train station that went so over budget it costs the exact same amount of money the mayor says we need for the asylum crisis. And the reason this is a big deal is because if the city doesn't do something quick, they are completely gonna run out of money, which is gonna cause them to make further cuts to the fire department, the police department, schools, libraries, you name it. Even roadside sanitation is being cut. But the thing that's got people pissed about these trees is that putting them here wasn't just a lousy decision. It's also an incredibly expensive decision. Look at how much each one of these bad boys cost. $3,600 to put a tree in a hole in the middle of the sidewalk. Are you happy they're gone?
I am extremely happy they're gone.
But you know how it costs $3,600 to put the tree in? Well, it also costs $3,600 to pull the tree out, which means these beautiful holes are $7,000 a pop. Also, there are an estimated 666,000 trees in the city, 20,000 of which get planted or replanted every single year, which means the city is spending $72 million a year on tree mobility. No wonder there's no money left over to clean the area around the trees that are already here. Look, I don't know why, maybe it's some sort of phenomenon, but the waste seems to pile up there, and well, okay, it's kind of piling up everywhere. But the point still stands. These holes are very expensive, and the city doesn't have unlimited money. But thankfully, it seems the city has actually listened to the cries of residents, and they've acted rather quickly to remove these trees and put them in homes where they will be better appreciated. And maybe not in the middle of where people are trying to walk. Which makes this one of the rare moments I can remember of the city doing something wrong, quickly admitting it, and quickly fixing it, even though it wasn't exactly cheap. But believe it or not, this is only the tip of the iceberg for how the city spends good good money on silly things. And if you think these are expensive, the next entry on our list is 7,000 times more expensive and possibly just as useful. Here we are at the headquarters of the city's Department of Health and Mental Hygiene. It's a massive building here in Long Island City, New York. But we're not here for this building. In fact, we're here for something that the people inside of this building are going to start doing. And starting next year, they're going to open a $100 million public health call center. Now, if that sounds like a lot of money, that's because it is. In fact, inside the call center, there will be doctors, there will be nurses, there will be all of the things you need to run a hospital, but it will only be there for phone calls. They're gonna make phone calls to people in so-called vulnerable health positions, and doctors and members of the general public will be able to call in and get health advice. I guess the benefit to this is that if you're a doctor and you're in the middle of brain surgery, you can call this place next year, and after a little hold music, they'll tell you what the next step is. But this may actually be of use to people who are in an emergency situation and need a consultation. And anybody who's ever felt sick and decided to Google that sickness and has wound up on WebMD or something has probably gotten the wrong diagnosis. So hopefully this will be more helpful. But the reason that people are saying plans for this new call center might actually be wasteful is for two reasons. Number one, the $100 million contract only staffs this place for 6 years, and then it expires and has to be renewed. On top of that, it may have been possible to build an authoritative website for $100 million or less that could exist forever and provide the same information as the call center is going to provide when people get through. And that's the other point of contention here, because this call center, it's going to be massive. It's actually a requirement that the new call center be able to handle 40,000 calls a day. Inbound calls, not outbound and inbound. And the crazy thing about that is 8 million people live in New York City, and if 40,000 of us call this call center, it means they'll only be able to talk to 1/2% of New York City's population and provide health information every single day. And that includes health professionals who may call in. I don't know what type of demand they're expecting, but if there's an emergency or something, there will probably be wait times and people probably won't get through. And I'm sure that it's a well-meaning, well-intentioned program, but what is the city gonna do to stop it from turning into the DMV? No hate on the DMV, it's just a great example. But it's a valid question at a time when the city is already reducing funding for pretty much everything it's responsible for. There's gonna be a lot less police in the city. They're also cutting after-school programs and childcare programs. And when you consider the cost of this call center and that everybody in New York, for the most part, has access to the internet, it almost seems like a call center with a limited amount of calls that it can handle on any given day is not exactly a solution that every New Yorker is gonna benefit from whenever they try to use it. And it costs $100 million. And this is money the city doesn't have, which is why right now people seeking asylum have to stay in a tent-style relief center out on a decommissioned military airfield. This center recently flooded and everyone had to be evacuated, and since the city claims they're short on resources, they didn't move these people to another facility where they could stay. They moved them to a school, and they put them in a school gymnasium, and then the people who attend that school weren't able to use it. They had to do remote learning for about 24, 48 hours while things got sorted out at the shelter. That's crazy. All to save money while it's being spent on stuff like this. But if you think $100 million is a lot of money, the next item on our list costs 10 times as much money.
The elevator is at the rear of the platform.
What you're looking at here is the Long Island Railroad East Access Project, a massive project that cost way too much, according to some people. Now, while it may in fact be America's most expensive, most delayed train project ever, it is a massive improvement for those who take public transit to get into the city, but it's on our list for a reason, because this project cost $11.6 billion, almost as much money as the city says it doesn't have because of the asylum crisis. But it does serve a purpose, and before this was built, there was no way for people on the Long Island Railroad to get to Grand Central, the nicest train station in the city. And before it was built, the only train station people on the Long Island Railroad could take was Penn Station. And this station is expected to serve 160,000 people a day. And it's going to save commuters 40 minutes each way. And apparently the escalator ride down to the train tracks takes a full minute to transcend. This is a massive escalator.
However, this project was not on time. The governor noting the idea first came about in 1963. The first funding was secured in the 90s, and it's been under construction for 15 years. But it is now done, built 17 stories below ground.
Wow, can you believe that? This project was officially started back in 1998. But even though it's very impressive, looking at it and being thrilled when you see it is kind of tough when you realize that it cost 7 times as much money as similar projects that happen around the world in other places. On top of that, construction on this beast of a train station was also started behind schedule. Apparently it didn't begin until 2001, and although it was supposed to open in 2009, it did not open until 2023, which makes it 14 years behind schedule. I guess building Bambi out of mosaic, this might take a very long time. But the place is beautiful. Look at these platforms. They're amazing looking. It's awesome down here, for sure. But the fact that this station is behind schedule kind of lines up with what you can expect from the train service in the actual station, because these have delays. But the real issue here is money. Originally, this whole thing was only supposed to cost $2.1 billion, but $11.1 billion, $11.6 billion. The estimate of the final cost varies depending on what you read, but it's way more expensive than it was ever intended to be. And it took way longer than anyone expected. But the fact that it's 5 times over budget, 14 years behind schedule, that is just absolutely insane. And it's one of the things that people point to when they say this is why the city's broke. And it's got critics on both the left and the right hammering the city over the asylum crisis, because both sides are arguing that if the local government here was more resourceful, there would be more money for asylum seekers and for police and for schools and for sanitation pickup, all the stuff that's being cut. And on top of that, maybe people wouldn't have to sleep in dangerous tents in a decommissioned airfield in Brooklyn. But the reason the city's now using tent shelters instead of former luxury hotels, that also has to do with money the city says it no longer has. But where exactly did that money go? You don't want to know. So here we are at the Row Hotel, one of the city's emergency shelters that used to be a former luxury establishment right here in Midtown. Its sister building is actually down the street, the Roosevelt Hotel, also a former luxury hotel. Both have over 1,000 rooms. That's the cost right there to rent the Roosevelt Hotel for the next 3 years, which means in that one property, which is similar to this one, the city pays $73 million a year. And if my math is right, the rate per room is around $200 a night. And on top of that, the building's other facilities like conference rooms can be used to help asylum seekers meet with caseworkers, get their paperwork straightened out. Not that bad of a deal considering it's a hotel, but the problem is the overall cost of this humanitarian crisis is more than the city can afford on its own, and that's the problem. And every spending decision that goes into operating a building like this, good or bad, those decisions add up. Some people wonder if going with hotels from the start of this was a good decision or a bad decision. On top of that, certain ways the city spends money inside the hotels are also up for debate, because those too could be a waste of money.
How long can New York City keep doing this at this capacity?
One of the big problems we have in New York City is that we are out of space. Everybody that you see sitting in these chairs now, we don't have a placement for them in our New York City system yet.
So it seems the city's leaders are now coming to the realization that they cannot afford this forever. And it's also important to understand how the city's lack of resources has contributed to how it has changed the way it's helped those seeking asylum over the last year. When this crisis first began, buses would take people to their hotels from the Port Authority terminal that were paid for by the city. But that has since stopped happening, and now people have to walk through Midtown Manhattan with all of their luggage in an unfamiliar city to get from where they're dropped off to where the processing center is on 45th Street. And the way it works now is when people get off a bus, they're given a map and a handshake, and they're pointed in generally the right direction. But walking from the bus terminal to a new hotel wasn't the only cut city leaders had planned.
City is also trying to change a key part of its support for migrants. This fall, officials asked a court for more flexibility when it comes to the city's so-called right to shelter rule.
So we're still at the hotel, it's behind me, and the city's right to shelter rules, the same rules that allow anyone who asks to stay in a place like this on a temporary basis. That's likely the reason this crisis looks the way it does here in New York. versus other parts of the country. And in order to avoid having to make further cuts to fires, police, and schools, and even to the hotels and other services provided to asylum seekers, the city is asking the court to let them off the hook, so to speak, give them more flexibility with how they handle this. In fact, back in September, folks staying in a hotel like this, if they were a single adult, were given a 30-day ultimatum, which basically said they could stay for 30 days and then they had to move out. The same rule was instituted for families, but with a 60-day restriction. And even though buildings like this are now reserved for families, sadly the luggage out in front indicates people are vacating and aren't really too sure where they'll have to go next. Now, at first, critics of the city's plan to move people out of the shelters and turn them into a revolving door operation, so to speak, predicted it would lead to mass homelessness. But that's not what's happened, because even though the city is having people move out of the shelters, it's not denying them the opportunity to reapply for shelter a second time. And before we go over some more ways of how the city's wasting money with regards to this crisis, it's important to understand that the city's mayor is taking pretty much 100% of the blame for how things are playing out right now.
I don't have deportation powers. I don't have the powers to turn buses around. I don't have the powers to say we're not going to give you, some form of housing. I don't have any of that power. And all I have the powers to do is to balance the budget.
Now, what's so interesting about this crisis is that even though it's political in nature, it's not something that the voters of New York voted in. Perhaps they could vote right to shelter out if they wanted to, but it's overseen by the state Supreme Court. There's nothing the city can do about it. Right to shelter is covered by a court-ordered consent decree, which goes back to the 1980s. But now the city is asking a court to give them more flexibility with how they handle a seemingly limitless number of right to shelter requests. Because again, the city says it doesn't have the money to keep putting people in expensive luxury hotels. But a couple of months ago, an investigation revealed that in certain facilities like this, the city's wasting almost $40,000 a day on food that nobody can eat. According to the New York Times, 5,000 meals were wasted in one day, and at $11 per meal, this would cost $1 million a month if it wasn't stopped. And apparently the meals that the city had paid for were not edible, some were rotten, some were only partially defrosted when they were served to the people who were supposed to eat them. And what's crazy is this whole story on the wasted meals broke right around Thanksgiving, when people were struggling with food insecurity here in New York right before the major holidays. And right now in the city, you've got empty community fridges, pantries running dry, and we're literally throwing food in the garbage, as well as planting trees in the middle of sidewalks so that people can't walk down them anymore for some reason. And that's why many New Yorkers are frustrated right now to hear that the city lacks resources when so many of those resources were used for things that got zero results. And what's upsetting about this is it's happening at a time when there are people in New York who need help more than ever. Do you think the city's wasting money? Let me know. I'll see you in the next video. Thanks for watching.